Victoria Ashford stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse, 40 floors above Seattle's glittering Christmas Eve streets. The city sprawled below in a constellation of holiday lights, each pinpoint representing families gathering lovers, embracing children, squealing over wrapped packages. She pressed her palm against the cold glass and felt nothing but the temperature differential. Her other hand held a prescription bottle, Ambien. 60 pills rattled inside the amber plastic, a sound she couldn't hear, but felt through her fingertips. The vibration traveled up her arm like a question she'd been asking herself for 3 years. 32 years old. Chief Executive Officer of Ashford Properties, the third largest commercial real estate firm in the Pacific Northwest. Net worth $52 million, though the exact figure shifted daily with market fluctuations she monitored obsessively. Forbes had profiled her last spring youngest female CEO in Seattle's real estate sector. They'd written, as if her age and gender mattered more than the 14 properties she'd acquired in 18 months. The profile photographer had asked her to smile. She'd complied the way she complied with all business requirements. Later, staring at the glossy pages, she'd barely recognized the woman in the designer suit, hair pulled into that severe bun, lips curved into something that resembled happiness, but tasted like performance. Her phone buzzed on the marble countertop. A text from Megan, her assistant. Car waiting downstairs for board dinner, 7 p.m., reservation at Canlis confirmed. Victoria picked up the bottle again, unscrewed the cap. The pills tumbled into her palm, small, white, ordinary. How many would it take? She'd researched this the way she researched everything. 15, maybe 20, combined with the whiskey already open on the bar cart. Painless, clinical. A business decision executed with precision. The phone buzzed again. Another text, this one from Richard Foster, the board's most senior member. Looking forward to celebrating a successful year tonight, Victoria. Your parents would be proud. Her parents. 3 years dead, incinerated in a private jet that had plummeted into the Pacific during what should have been a routine flight to their Maui vacation home. The National Transportation Safety Board report had used words like mechanical failure and unsurvivable impact. But Victoria had read it as instant extinction of the only two people who'd ever learned American Sign Language for you. She set the pills on the windowsill, lined them up in neat rows. 60 chances to stop existing. 60 exits from a life that looked successful in every metric except the one that mattered. The apartment stretched behind her 3,500 square feet of architectural minimalism. White walls, black leather furniture. Abstract art her interior designer had insisted conveyed power and sophistication. The only personal item was a single photograph on the mantel, her parents on Christmas morning, 15 years ago, their hands frozen mid-sign spelling out "I love you" in the visual language that had been their secret family code. Victoria had been 17 in that photo home from her first semester at Princeton, Dave since age 4 when bacterial meningitis had destroyed her cochlear nerves so completely that even the most advanced implants offered no hope. Her parents, both hearing, had learned ASL within 6 months. Her father had hired a full-time tutor. Her mother had joined deaf community events, becoming fluent enough to interpret poetry. They'd made her feel like deafness wasn't disability, just difference. Then they died and she'd learned the truth: difference without someone who bridges it becomes isolation. Absolute, suffocating. She'd built Ashford Properties into an empire as a monument to them. Every acquisition, every negotiation, every hostile takeover had been a prayer offered to ghosts. See, she wanted to tell them, your deaf daughter isn't helpless, isn't broken, isn't less. But they couldn't see, and the empire felt like a mausoleum. Victoria scooped the pills back into the bottle, dropped it into her Hermes handbag. Not tonight, she decided. Tonight she'd go to dinner, smile at the board members who barely concealed their belief that a deaf woman had no business running a company, and return home to this expensive silence. Tomorrow maybe, or the day after. The pills could wait. They were patient. She changed into her evening wear, black Armani suit, pearl earrings she wore for symmetry rather than adornment heels that added 3 inches to her 5'7" frame. The mirror showed her a woman in control, poised, untouchable, empty. The phone buzzed one final time. She ignored it, grabbed her coat, and headed for the elevator. As the doors closed, her reflection multiplied in the mirrored walls, 7 Victorias, all alone, descending into a night that promised nothing except more of the same. 6 hours earlier, across Seattle in the industrial Georgetown neighborhood, Garrett Sullivan's world operated on an entirely different frequency. His workshop smelled like cedar and sweat, the good, honest odors of physical labor. Sawdust covered the concrete floor and drifts golden in the weak winter sunlight, filtering through high windows. A portable radio played classic rock he'd long since stopped hearing, as music just rhythm for his hands, which moved across oak planks with the confidence of 15 years' experience. The chair taking shape under his attention would sell for $600 if he could find a buyer. Hand-carved spindles, mortise, and tenon joints, tight enough to last a century. His father had taught him this craft before arthritis had gnarled the old man's fingers useless. "Garrett," he'd said during their last conversation before the cancer took him, "you make things that outlive you. That's not just work. That's legacy." Legacy, the word echoed differently now. Garrett glanced at the corner where Willa sat cross-legged, hunched over a coloring book with crayons worn down to nubs. 7 years old, brown curls escaping from a ponytail he'd attempted that morning, her mother's eyes staring up at him from a different face. Those eyes tracked him as he shut off the sander. "Daddy, are we getting a tree this year?" Her voice carried the particular hopefulness of children who've learned to expect disappointment but haven't yet stopped asking. Garrett set down his tools, wiped his hands on jeans already stained with a dozen different wood finishes. "Baby, we talked about this. Money's tight right now. The Hendersons still haven't paid for their dining set. But Mommy always got us a tree." The words hit like they always did, not accusatory, just factual. Diane had handled Christmas. Diane had handled everything that required joy, spontaneity, the kind of lightness Garrett had never quite mastered. 3 years gone, and Willa still measured life in before and after terms, as if her mother's death had split time itself. Garrett crossed the workshop, knelt to his daughter's level. His knees popped, 38 years old and already feeling 50. He signed as he spoke, the muscle memory of ASL returning like an old friend. "I know, sweetheart, but Mom's not here anymore. It's just us now. And we're doing okay, right?" Willa's small hands moved in reply. Her signing still clumsy, but earnest. "I miss her." "Me too, baby. Every single day." He pulled her into a hug, breathed in the strawberry shampoo he'd bought on sale at Safeway. 3 years since Diane's diagnosis. 2.5 since the ALS had stolen her voice, forcing them into sign language as her only communication. 2 years, 3 months since she died in their bedroom, Garrett holding her hand while Willa slept in the next room, mercifully unaware that her mother was slipping away with each labored breath. The workshop phone rang, an actual landline, because cell service was spotty in the metal building. Garrett released Willa, stood, grabbed the receiver. "Sullivan Woodcraft." The voice on the other end belonged to Monica Chen from Premier Furniture Connections, a placement service that matched craftsmen with high-end clients. "Mr. Sullivan, I have an emergency job. VIP client needs a table repaired today. Imported Italian walnut, very expensive. Can you do it?" Garrett checked his watch. 2:15 on Christmas Eve. Mrs. Clara from next door could watch Willa for a few hours if he begged. "What's the pay?" $600 cash if you finish by end of day." 600. That was rent. That was groceries for 3 weeks. That was maybe a small tree from the lot on Pacific Avenue. Address, Scala Building downtown. Penthouse unit. Client name is Victoria Ashford. Garrett jotted it down, promised he'd be there by 2:30, hung up and looked at Willa, who'd stopped coloring to watch him. "I've got a job, honey. Mrs. Clara will watch you for a bit." "What kind of job?" "The kind that might get us that tree after all." Willa's face transformed, hope replacing resignation. Garrett felt the familiar weight of parental responsibility, that tightrope walk between managing expectations and preserving whatever childhood magic survived in a home haunted by loss. 20 minutes later, toolbag loaded in his battered Toyota pickup, Garrett merged onto I-5 northbound. Seattle traffic crawled even on holidays, giving him too much time to think. He'd Googled the Escala building at a red light, luxury high-rise penthouse units starting at $4 million. The kind of place where his calloused hands and paint-stained jeans would mark him instantly as hired help rather than resident. But $600 didn't care about class distinctions. $600 was salvation dressed as furniture repair. The Escala's lobby gleamed with marble and understated wealth. A doorman in an actual uniform raised eyebrows at Garrett's appearance. but checked his ID against a list and directed him to the private elevator serving the penthouse. The elevator ride took 45 seconds. Garrett counted, watching the floor numbers climb, wondering what kind of person lived at the top of the world. Old money, probably. Tech wealth. Someone for whom $600 was a rounding error. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. A young woman in business, casual assistant Garrett, guest greeted him with professional courtesy that didn't quite mask her assessment of his blue-collar credentials. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm Megan. Ms. Ashford is in her office. The table is this way." She led him through rooms that belonged in architecture magazines. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Elliott Bay like a living photograph. Furniture that probably cost more than his truck sat in arrangements too perfect for actual living. Everything screamed wealth, but the particular kind of wealth that felt like armor. The damaged table stood in the dining area, a massive slab of Italian walnut, with a corner chipped badly enough that Garrett winced. Beautiful piece. The damage was fresh, probably from careless movers. Fixable, but it would take precision. "Ms. Ashford will be with you shortly. She's finishing a call." Megan disappeared, leaving Garrett alone with the table and the view. He ran his hand over the wood, feeling the grain, already planning the repair. His fingers had learned to read wood the way some people read faces. Every knot and swirl told a story about seasons and soil and time. Footsteps announced someone's approach. Garrett turned and found himself facing a woman who contradicted every expectation the penthouse had created. Victoria Ashford was young, early 30s maybe, blonde hair pulled back severely enough to hurt, wearing a suit that probably cost what he made in a month. But it was her eyes that stopped him, blue, intelligent, and carrying a particular kind of exhaustion he recognized from his own mirror. She stood with arms crossed, posture defensive, and for a long moment simply looked at him. Then she pulled out her phone, typed something, and a mechanical voice emerged from the device. "You're the carpenter, text-to-speech," which meant Garrett kept his expression neutral. Spoke clearly while facing her. "Yes, ma'am. Garrett Sullivan, I'm here about the table." She'd been reading his lips. He could tell by the way her eyes focused on his mouth the slight delay before she typed another response. "Can you fix it?" He examined the damage again, already knowing the answer but wanting to be accurate. "Yes, but it'll take 3 to 4 hours. This is expensive wood. I can repair the structure, but it won't look factory new. There'll be a visible seam." Her fingers flew across the phone screen. "I'm paying you $600 to do your best not to explain why it won't be perfect." The mechanical voice delivered the words without inflection, but Garrett heard the subtext. He'd dealt with wealthy clients before, people who mistook hired help for servants, who confused economic transaction with ownership. "Understood, ma'am." "Ms. Ashford." "Not ma'am, I'm not elderly." "Understood, Ms. Ashford." She nodded curtly, moved to a nearby desk where a laptop waited. Garrett unpacked his tools, acutely aware of being watched. He'd worked in plenty of homes where clients hovered, but something about Victoria's observation felt different. Not supervisory, more like she was studying him, trying to solve an equation. He lost himself in the work. Sanding, cutting a matching piece from the sample board he always carried, mixing wood filler to precisely match the walnut's grain. His hands moved with practiced efficiency while his mind wandered. This woman, living alone in this palace, working on Christmas Eve, unable to hear the city singing carols 40 floors below. The apartment felt like a museum, beautiful and utterly lifeless. No photos except one, no clutter, no evidence that anyone actually lived here. Loneliness had a particular texture, Garrett had learned. After Diane died, his house had felt the same way, pristine, because there was no one to make messes quiet, because silence was easier than the effort of conversation. He'd emerged from that fog only because Willa needed him functional. But he recognized the signs in Victoria's penthouse. This was a monument to absence. An hour into the repair, he glanced up and caught Victoria wiping her eyes, quickly turning away. She'd been crying. Silently, because of course she wouldn't make sounds she couldn't hear. The impulse to say something rose in him, the same instinct that made him check on Willow during nightmares. But Victoria wasn't his daughter, wasn't his responsibility. She was a client. A wealthy, probably difficult client who wanted her table fixed, not her life evaluated by the help. Still, the image of her wiping away tears stuck in his mind like a splinter. He worked in silence for another hour before his conscience overrode professionalism. "Ms. Ashford, You okay? She turned surprise, replacing whatever emotion had been on her face. Her thumbs moved across the phone. Why would you think I'm not? Garrett kept his voice gentle, made sure she could see his mouth clearly. Just checking. Sorry if I overstepped. Her expression shifted through several emotions too quickly for him to track. Finally, she typed, "Why do you care?" Because you were crying, he thought. Because I know what it looks like when someone's drowning in an empty room. But he said none of that. Just the kind of person I am, I guess. She studied him for a long moment, then returned to her laptop without responding. But something in the air had changed, a membrane of professional distance punctured. Garrett finished the structural repair around 4:30. The wood filler needed to cure overnight before he could sand and finish it, but the table was sound. He packed his tools, preparing to explain the next steps. Victoria appeared before he could speak, examining his work with an appraiser's eye. She ran her fingers over the repair, nodded once, then typed, "Good. When can you finish?" "Tomorrow. I'll need to sand and stain, but the hard part's done. I need it complete today." "Ms. Ashford, the filler needs 12 hours minimum. If I work it wet, the wood will crack." Her jaw tightened, but she nodded. Typed, "Fine. Tomorrow then. Come by 10. Actually, tomorrow's Christmas. If you don't mind waiting until the 26th. I mind. Double rate. 1,200 total. $1,200. Garrett's brain performed instant calculations, rent, utilities. Food, Willa's upcoming birthday, the truck's registration due in January. $1,200 was a month's breathing room. But it was also Christmas. Willa's first Christmas, where she was old enough to really remember, really feel the absence of traditions Diane had created. He'd promised her the day no work, just them, trying to cobble together something that felt like family. The silence stretched while Victoria waited for his answer. Her expression had shifted into something harder, more CEO than person. This was a negotiation now, and she expected capitulation. Garrett made a decision that surprised him. "I'm sorry, Ms. Ashford, I can't tomorrow. My daughter, it's her first real Christmas since her mother died. I need to be home." Victoria's phone stayed silent. Her eyes, though, something moved behind them. Not anger, something softer and more painful. She typed slowly, "Your wife passed away 3 years ago, ALS." More typing, and "What's ALS?" "Lou Gehrig's disease. It steals everything, movement and speech, eventually breathing. Diane couldn't talk the last 6 months. So I learned." He stopped himself, but too late. Victoria's expression had gone from polite interest to intense focus. Her hands moved. "Learned what?" Garrett hesitated, then made another decision, this one instinctive. He raised his hands and signed, "I learned American Sign Language so my wife wouldn't have to die alone in silence." The effect was instantaneous and profound. Victoria's eyes went wide, her mouth actually dropping open. Her hands came up automatically, signing back, "You know ASL, enough to communicate. I'm not fluent, but—" She cut him off, signing rapidly. "When did you learn? How long? Why?" Her voice, unused, unpracticed, emerged alongside the signs, the words slurred but passionate. No one has signed to me in 3 years, not since my parents died. Everyone else uses interpreters or phones or—" The sentence broke off. Tears ran down her face openly, now no attempt to hide them. Garrett stood, frozen toolbag in hand, watching this woman, this wealthy, powerful, untouchable woman, crack open like wood under too much pressure. He signed carefully. "I learned 5 years ago when Diane was diagnosed. Kept practicing after she died because it felt like keeping her alive. I teach basic classes at the community center sometimes." Victoria's hands shook as she signed in. "My parents died in a plane crash 3 years ago. They were the only hearing people who ever really learned ASL for me. Everyone else just, they accommodate, but they don't connect." Her voice broke on the last word. Garrett understood then what he was seeing, not a CEO having a breakdown, but a deaf woman encountering her own language unexpectedly in a place where she'd grown accustomed to being voiceless. He signed, "I'm sorry about your parents. I'm sorry about your wife." They stood there, two strangers bound by grief and a shared vocabulary of silent hands. Garrett felt something shift in his chest, a recognition he couldn't quite name. This woman wasn't what she'd seemed. The armor was real, but underneath, Victoria seemed to catch herself. Her expression closed down, hands dropping. She grabbed her phone, typed, "Thank you for the repair. 600 as agreed." The professional distance slammed back into place so fast Garrett felt whiplashed. He watched her retreat into that CEO shell signing, replaced by mechanical text-to-speech. Cash or transfer? The robotic voice asked. Cash is fine. She disappeared into another room, returned with an envelope. Their fingers brushed as she handed it over, and Garrett could have sworn she flinched. You can see yourself out. Dismissed. He recognized the tactic. People use it on him all the time. That subtle assertion of class hierarchy. You're the help. You did your job. Now disappear. But something made him resist. Ms. Ashford, if you ever want to talk, just to talk in ASL, no business, I'm in the phone book. Sullivan Woodcraft. Her expression flickered, but she didn't sign, didn't type. Just stood there holding her phone like a shield. Garrett left. The elevator descent felt longer than the ascent. He stood alone in the mirror, watching himself fragment into multiple reflections, and wondered what the hell had just happened. He'd gone to fix a table. He'd found what a kindred spirit, a woman whose loneliness matched his own, or just a client having a bad day, embarrassed by emotional vulnerability she'd never intended to show. By the time he reached street level, Garrett had convinced himself it meant nothing. Rich people had rich people problems. He had $600 and a daughter to get home to. That was reality. The rest was just the weird intimacy of strangers who'd accidentally revealed too much. Seattle had descended into early winter darkness, the streets transformed by Christmas lights into something magical and slightly desperate. Garrett drove south toward Georgetown, his mind replaying Victoria's tears, her signs, the ache in her voice when she'd said no one. He understood that ache. After Diane died, well-meaning friends had visited for weeks, then months, then not at all. People were uncomfortable with grief that lasted beyond social acceptability. They wanted you fixed, moved on safely past the messy parts. So you learned to grieve alone, to build walls, to pretend competence until the performance became indistinguishable from truth. Victoria Ashford's penthouse was just a more expensive version of the same cage. Mrs. Clara met him at the door to his rental house, a sagging bungalow that smelled perpetually of mildew but cost less than $1,000 a month. Willa launched herself at him, nearly knocking him over. Did you get the money? Can we get a tree? Garrett caught her, swung her up, despite his aching back. We got the money, baby. Tree tomorrow, I promise. Later, after Mrs. Clara had left and Willa was theoretically asleep, Garrett sat in his workshop at the house's rear. He should have been working on the chair. Time was money always. But his hands kept drifting to his phone. He Googled Victoria Ashford and felt his stomach drop as the results loaded. Chief Executive Officer, Ashford Properties. Net worth estimated at $52 million. Forbes profile, Business Journal awards. Society page photos showing her at galas, charity events, always alone or flanked by obvious business associates. Never smiling, never relaxed. 32 years old and running a commercial real estate empire. Deaf since childhood. Parents deceased 3 years ago in that plane crash he vaguely remembered from the news. Local business magnates killed in mechanical failure over the Pacific. She'd inherited everything, built on it, became more successful than her parents had been, and apparently spent Christmas Eve alone in a tower crying while some carpenter fixed her table. Garrett closed the browser. This wasn't his concern. He had his own life, his own struggles. Victoria Ashford belonged to a world so far removed from his that they might as well inhabit different planets. But his hands remembered signing with her. The way her face had transformed when he'd used ASL, like someone finding water in a desert. The particular quality of her loneliness, which matched his own note for note. He should forget about it, about her, file it under weird rich people, and move on. Instead, he found himself thinking about tomorrow, Christmas Day, which he'd told her he couldn't work. What would she do? Sit in that museum penthouse alone? Order catered food that tasted like money and nothing else? Stop it, he told himself. Not your problem, not your life. But the image wouldn't leave him. Victoria Ashford signing no one with tears on her face. 6:15 Christmas Eve found Victoria exactly where she'd promised herself she wouldn't be. Café Knoll, a tourist trap coffee shop in Pike Place Market that stayed open on holidays for exactly the kind of lonely souls who couldn't bear to be home. She'd canceled the board dinner with a terse email about food poisoning. Megan had probably seen through the lie, but knew better than to push. Victoria had changed from the suit into jeans and a cashmere sweater, her version of casual, which still cost more than most people's monthly rent. The cafe bustled with Christmas Eve energy. Families claimed the large tables, children sticky with hot chocolate and too much sugar. Couples nestled in corners, hands intertwined, radiating the particular smugness of people who'd found their person and wanted the world to notice. Friend groups sprawled across pushed-together chairs, laughing at jokes Victoria couldn't hear, but could see in the way their bodies shook mouths wide. She chose the corner table farthest from the noise, a tactical position that offered sightlines to the entire room while minimizing the chance of unwanted interaction. Ordered chamomile tea from a waitress who spoke too fast for lip reading, forcing Victoria to point at the menu. Like a tourist. The tea arrived lukewarm. Victoria wrapped her hands around the cup anyway, grateful for something to hold. This cafe had been her parents' favorite. They'd brought her here every Christmas Eve since she was 8, a tradition that outlasted childhood and became ritual. Her father would order gingerbread cookies. Her mother would get peppermint cocoa. Victoria always had tea. She'd hated coffee's bitterness, even before meningitis stole her hearing. They'd sit for hours, her parents signing about work, family, the year's triumphs and disappointments. Other diners would stare at the flying hands, the silent conversation, and Victoria had loved making them uncomfortable with visibility. Now she sat alone at the same table 3 years into orphanhood that would never end, drinking tea that tasted like memory and ash. Her handbag sat on the chair beside her. Inside, the Ambien bottle waited with pharmaceutical patience. She'd left the penthouse planning to come here, have tea, then go home, and finally commit to those 60 pills. A Christmas gift to herself, permanent exit from this performance of living. But something about the encounter with Garrett Sullivan had shaken that resolve. Not eliminated it, the pills still called with their promise of silence, even deeper than deafness, but complicated it. He'd signed to her, casually, competently, like it was the most natural thing in the world. For 5 years, he'd maintained a skill most people learned only when forced, preserving it, even after the person who'd required it was dead. Why? What kind of man did that? Victoria watched a family at the center table, mother, father, 3 children, ranging from toddler to teenager. The mother signed something and all 3 kids signed back. Deaf family, she realized. CODA kids, children of deaf adults for whom ASL was first language. The mother caught Victoria staring, smiled with the particular warmth deaf people reserve for recognizing each other in hearing spaces. Signed it, Merry Christmas. Victoria's hands came up automatically. Merry Christmas to you too. The mother gestured to the empty chairs at Victoria's table. You're alone, join us. Panic seized Victoria's throat. She shook her head, signed hastily, I'm fine, thank you. The mother's expression shifted to understanding, then sadness. She signed, the door's open if you change your mind, before returning to her family. Victoria looked down at her tea, shame heating her cheeks. That woman had offered kindness, a community connection, everything Victoria claimed to want, and she'd refused. Why? Because accepting meant lowering walls, meant admitting she needed help, meant risking rejection when they discovered she was broken in ways that had nothing to do with deafness. Better to stay alone, safer, more predictable. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Ms. Ashford, this is Garrett Sullivan. I'm sorry for what I said earlier. If you need the table finished tomorrow, I can make it work. I understand business doesn't stop for holidays. Victoria stared at the message. He'd tracked down her number, probably got it from Monica at Premier Furniture. Was apologizing for having boundaries. Offering to sacrifice Christmas with his daughter because a rich client might need furniture repaired. The automatic response would be, yes, come by at 10. $1,200 was nothing to her, potentially everything to him. She held economic power. Wielding it was simple, but something else rose in her, an emotion she barely recognized as shame. This man had learned the sign language for his dying wife, still practiced it years later, taught it to others. He'd signed with Victoria when he didn't have to see her tears and not judged, offered friendship without expectation. And her first instinct was to buy his Christmas. She typed carefully, don't come tomorrow. Spend the day with your daughter. The table can wait. Merry Christmas. Sent it before she could reconsider. Watched the screen irrationally, hoping for an immediate response that didn't come. Of course it didn't come. He was probably putting Willa to bed, reading stories, doing normal parent things in his normal life. He'd sent a professional courtesy text and would see her reply whenever he checked his phone next. Victoria ordered another tea, watched the cafe's happy chaos. The evening stretched ahead with its familiar emptiness, but the quality of that emptiness had shifted slightly. She wasn't planning suicide anymore, just endurance. The cafe door opened. A man and a small girl entered, both wearing matching scarves that had clearly been hand-knitted with more enthusiasm than skill. The girl, maybe 7 or 8, had curls that defied her ponytail and eyes that tracked everything with fierce intelligence. Victoria's heart stopped. Garrett Sullivan, here, with his daughter. He hadn't seen her yet, was ordering at the counter, the girl tugging his sleeve impatiently. Victoria could leave, should leave, slip out before he noticed to avoid the awkwardness of running into the help in public. But she couldn't move. Just watched as Garrett bent to his daughter's level, listened to whatever she was saying, then straightened and scanned the cafe for seating. His eyes found Victoria. Surprise registered, then something warmer. He signed across the room, "Small world." The girl followed his gaze, saw Victoria, and immediately began pulling Garrett toward the corner table. She had her father's fearlessness, Victoria realized. The confidence of children who'd been loved thoroughly enough to believe the world was fundamentally safe. They reached the table. Garrett looked apologetic. "Ms. Ashford, I'm sorry, we didn't mean to intrude. Willa will find another." But Willa was staring at Victoria with open curiosity, the kind kids had before adults taught them to be subtle. Then she signed clumsy but earnest, "Hi, I'm Willa." Victoria's breath caught. This child signed. This child, who couldn't be more than 7, knew ASL. She signed back automatically. "Hi, Willa, I'm Victoria." Willa's face exploded into a grin. She turned to Garrett, signs flying, "Daddy, she knows our language." Garrett's expression had gone soft, watching his daughter. He signed, "I told you some people speak with hands. But I've never met anyone else except you. This is so cool." Victoria felt something crack in her chest. When was the last time anyone had been excited to meet her? When had her existence sparked joy instead of calculation? Power plays people wanting something. Willa looked at the empty chairs at Victoria's table, then up at Garrett with a question. Victoria couldn't read. He shook his head, but Willa persisted, adding actual jumping to her silent argument. Garrett sighed, looked at Victoria. "I apologize. She wants to ask if we can sit with you. I told her you probably want privacy." Victoria heard herself speaking, her voice emerging rusty from disuse. "It's fine, please, sit." The words came out slurred, the way they always did when she relied on vocal cords instead of hands. Years of speech therapy had given her functional speech, but it remained her third language after ASL and written English. Garrett's eyes widened slightly at her speaking or at the invitation. Victoria couldn't tell. But he nodded, helped Willa into a chair, took the seat across from Victoria. Willa bounced in her chair, signed, "Are you Daddy's friend?" "We just met today," Victoria signed back. "Your daddy fixed my table. He's really good at fixing things. He fixed my dollhouse when I broke it, and he made me a bookshelf that's pink." The conversation flowed in that easy way children manage, jumping between topics without self-consciousness. Willa asked 1,000 questions. Where did Victoria live? Did she have a doll? What was her favorite color? Had she ever been to Disneyland? Victoria answered each one, feeling rusty gears of social interaction grinding to life after years of disuse. When had she last talked to a child? Had she ever? Garrett ordered for them, hot chocolate for Willa, coffee for himself, another tea for Victoria, though she hadn't asked. He signed as he spoke, including both his daughter and Victoria in every sentence. The gesture felt natural for him, unconscious. This was how he moved through the world, making space for silence to have voice. Their food arrived. Willa dove into a plate of pancakes that seemed larger than her head, signing with syrup, sticky hands about school, her best friend, Zoe the dog, she wanted, but they couldn't afford. Garrett winced at that last part, but Willa continued oblivious. "But Daddy says maybe next year when business is better. He's really good at making furniture. But people don't always want to pay for good stuff. They want cheap stuff from IKEA." "Willa," Garrett signed, gentle reprimand clear. "What? It's true, you said so." Victoria found herself smiling. Actually smiling, not the corporate mask she'd perfected, but genuine amusement at this tiny force of nature who knew no filter. She signed to Garrett, "She's wonderful." His expression softened further. She's my whole world. Something in the way he signed it, the tenderness, the absolute certainty, made Victoria's chest ache. What must it feel like to love and be loved that completely? To have your whole world embodied in one small person who trusted you to make everything okay. Willa, oblivious to the adult moment, asked Victoria, "Do you have kids?" "No." "Are you married?" "Willa." Garrett's hands cut through the air with parental mortification. But Victoria sighed, "No. I live alone." Willa's face scrunched in thought. That sounds lonely. Out of the mouths of babes. Victoria felt tears threatening and pushed them back. Sometimes it is. You should get a dog. Dogs make everything better, right, Daddy? Garrett signed, "That's the theory you keep pushing, Chess." They finished eating. Willa chattered on, oblivious to the strange energy at the table, or perhaps perfectly attuned to it. In that way, children sometimes were filling silences with innocent noise until adults remembered how to connect. Victoria excused herself to use the restroom. Inside the small space, she gripped the sink and stared at her reflection. Her eyes were red-rimmed, mascara slightly smudged. She looked like someone who'd been crying, which she supposed she had been internally, if not externally. She thought about the Ambien bottle in her bag. Tonight had changed something. Not fixed anything. She was still broken, still alone, still fundamentally separate from the world's warmth. But the pull toward oblivion had loosened its grip, replaced by curiosity about what might happen next. When she returned to the table, Willa had fallen asleep in her chair, head pillowed on her arms. Garrett was signing slowly. "I should get her home. I'm sorry if we disrupted your evening." "Oh," Victoria signed, "You didn't. I was alone. This was better. We're usually better at Christmas than this. Last year was worse. This year I thought—" He stopped, hands frozen mid-sign. Victoria waited. Garrett continued, "I thought maybe we were getting better at being without Diane. But holidays are hard. All the traditions we built, they're like ghosts now." "I understand. My parents and I came here every Christmas Eve. Tonight's the first time I've been back since they died." Their eyes met, two people broken in similar ways, recognizing each other across the table. Victoria felt something shift, a tectonic plate of isolation cracking just enough to let in light. Garrett signed, "Would you, and please say no if this is weird, would you want to get coffee? Not tonight, obviously, but sometime, just to talk, in ASL. No business." Victoria's first instinct was refusal. Getting close to people meant risk, meant eventual disappointment when they discovered she was fundamentally unlikable beneath the money and success. But Willa's words echoed, "That sounds lonely." It was lonely. God, it was so lonely. And here was someone offering connection without agenda, friendship without contract. She signed, "I'd like that." Garrett's smile transformed his face, erasing years of grief and stress. He pulled out his phone, they exchanged numbers, made tentative plans for Saturday. Then Garrett gathered Willa, gently lifting her without waking her. She mumbled something against his shoulder thumb, finding its way to her mouth even in sleep. He signed one-handed, "Merry Christmas, Victoria." She signed back, "Merry Christmas, Garrett." They left. Victoria sat alone at the table again, but the quality of aloneness had changed. She'd started the evening planning suicide. She was ending it with a coffee date scheduled for Saturday. The shift felt seismic. Outside the cafe windows, Seattle glittered with Christmas Eve magic. Victoria watched couples walking hand-in-hand, families loading into cars, strangers wishing each other joy. The world was full of people celebrating connection while she sat behind glass observing. But for the first time in 3 years, she wondered if observation might become participation. If the life she'd been watching from outside might have space for her after all. She reached into her bag. The Ambien bottle felt lighter, somehow less inevitable. She took it out, held it in her palm. 60 pills, 60 exits, 60 ways to stop the loneliness permanently. Or one coffee wadi, one small act of courage, one chance at connection. Victoria stood, walked to the cafe's trash can and dropped the bottle inside. It landed with a rattling thud, anonymous among coffee cups and crumpled napkins. She didn't feel suddenly healed, didn't feel fixed or whole or even okay. But she felt something she hadn't in 3 years, curious about tomorrow, about Saturday, about whether Garrett Sullivan might become the first friend she'd had since her parents died. It wasn't much, but it was something, and something was more than the nothing she'd been living with. Victoria paid her bill, left a generous tip for the waitress who'd been patient with her halting speech, stepped out into the cold December night. Snow had started falling, rare for Seattle Magical when it happened. She walked toward where her car was parked, hands in pockets, watching the snowflakes drift through streetlights. Thought about Willa's face when she'd realized Victoria knew ASL, about Garrett's gentleness with his daughter, about the way neither of them had treated Victoria's deafness as tragedy or limitation, just as fact. Maybe that was what she'd been missing. People who saw her as Victoria first, deaf second, CEO, distant third. People who wanted her presence, not her money. Who offered kindness without calculation. She unlocked her car, but didn't get in immediately. Just stood in the falling snow, feeling cold flakes melt on her upturned face, and allowed herself something unprecedented hope. Tomorrow was Christmas. Saturday was coffee. Beyond that stretched an unknowable future full of possibility and risk. For the first time in 3 years, Victoria Ashford wanted to see what came next. Saturday morning arrived with pale winter sunshine filtering through clouds. Victoria woke at 6, her body clock refused to acknowledge weekends, and spent the next 3 hours trying to decide what one wore to casual coffee with a carpenter and his 7-year-old daughter. Her closet offered 2 categories: corporate armor and workout clothes she'd bought but never used. Nothing in between. Everything screamed wealth or power-coded messages about status she couldn't turn off even when she wanted to. She settled on dark jeans that had cost $400 but looked ordinary, paired with a cream cashmere sweater. Pulled her hair into a low ponytail instead of the severe bun. Left off the pearls, stared at her reflection, and saw someone trying very hard to look like she wasn't trying. The Starbucks Garrett had suggested sat in Capitol Hill, a neighborhood Victoria drove through but never stopped in. She arrived 15 minutes early, a habit formed by years of controlling meetings through punctuality. Ordered a latte she didn't want, claimed a table near the window, and tried not to check her phone every 30 seconds. They arrived at exactly 10 o'clock. Garrett in his usual flannel and jeans, Willa wearing a purple coat that looked homemade. The girl spotted Victoria immediately and ran ahead of her father, signing before she'd even reached the table. "You came. Daddy said you might be too busy." Victoria signed back, "I wanted to see you again." Garrett caught up, slightly breathless. "Sorry, someone was very excited and may have rushed me out the door." Willa climbed into the chair beside Victoria, already pulling a coloring book from her backpack. The crayons she extracted were worn to nubs, some reduced to chunks barely usable. She spread them across the table with the unself-conscious pride of children showing treasures. "I'm coloring princesses. See, this one's Elsa, but I don't have the right blue for her dress." Victoria watched those small hands work, something tightening in her chest. When was the last time she'd been around a child? Had she ever really? Her world consisted of adults who wanted things children existing only as theoretical concepts discussed in estate planning meetings. Garrett ordered hot chocolate for Willa, coffee for himself. Asked Victoria if she wanted anything else. She shook her head, cradling the latte she'd barely touched. They fell into conversation that felt both awkward and oddly natural. Willa filled silences with observations about everything: the Christmas lights still up across the street, the dog walking past outside, whether Victoria had ever tried dipping French fries in milkshakes, because it was amazing. Garrett signed more than he spoke, including Victoria automatically. She realized this was his normal, the way he'd learned to move through the world with a wife who'd lost speech. Sign and voice simultaneously, making space for silence to participate. "How was Christmas?" Victoria signed. Garrett's expression flickered. "Complicated. We got a tree, small one, from the discount lot. Made cookies." Willa opened presents. "What did you get her?" "Used bike from Craigslist. I fixed it up, painted it. She doesn't know it's not new." Willa, oblivious to the adult conversation, had moved to Victoria's side of the table and was coloring directly on Victoria's arm with a purple crayon. Victoria looked down at the marks appearing on her expensive sweater and felt not annoyance but something warm and unfamiliar. The coloring session lasted 20 minutes before Willa grew restless. She wandered to the window, pressing her nose against the glass. Victoria watched Garrett watch his daughter, the particular alertness of single parents who'd learned to track their children's moods like weather patterns. "She's struggling," he signed. "Diane loved Christmas. Every tradition we have is a ghost of what she created." "How long were you married?" 8 years. Met in college. She was art major. I was doing vocational carpentry. Her parents hated me, thought she was marrying down. His hands moved with controlled precision, but Victoria caught the old pain underneath. They weren't wrong. I was a kid from Tacoma whose dad fixed furniture. She was from Mercer Island money, but she didn't care about that. Did you? Garrett's eyes met hers every single day. Wondered when she'd wake up and realize she could do better. Victoria understood that fear intimately. She signed, "My parents didn't care that I was deaf." Made me feel like it didn't matter. Then they died and I realized it mattered to everyone else. They sat with that shared recognition, two people whose primary relationships had been with those who'd seen past their fundamental difference. Without that vision, the world became hostile territory. Willa returned to the table and announced she was bored. Garrett checked his watch. They'd been there 90 minutes. Time to go. But Victoria felt panic at the thought of returning to her empty penthouse. "There's an art supply store 2 blocks over," she signed quickly. "I saw it on the way here. Would Willa like new crayons?" Garrett's expression shifted, wariness replacing ease. "Victoria, you don't need to." "I want to. Please." The store was a riot of color that made Willa gasp audibly. She wandered aisles filled with markers, paint, sketch pads, her eyes wide with the particular hunger of children who understood scarcity. Victoria followed her, watched her touch things gently, reverently, before moving on. No grabbing, no demands, the behavior of a child who'd learned not to ask for what she couldn't have. When Willa found the professional colored pencil set, 72 colors in a wooden case, she stopped and stared. Her fingers traced the box but didn't open it. Victoria checked the price tag, $150. She picked it up, carried it to the register. Garrett materialized beside her. "Victoria, no, that's too expensive. It's a gift for Willa. It's $150. "I know what it has." His jaw tightened. "We can't accept that." Victoria turned to face him fully. "Why not?" "Because," Garrett's hands moved sharply, frustration bleeding through. "Because it's too much. Because I can't reciprocate. Because my daughter will think everyone can just buy whatever they want." "I'm not everyone. I'm your friend, and friends give gifts. Not gifts that cost more than I make in a day." The words hung between them, bright and terrible. Victoria saw the gulf opening, not just economic difference, but the meaning assigned to it. She was offering generosity. He was experiencing humiliation. She set the pencils on the counter, paid before Garrett could protest further. The cashier wrapped them in cheerful paper, handed the package to Victoria. Outside, Willa waited on a bench, swinging her legs. Victoria gave her the package. The girl's eyes went huge when she opened it. "For me? Really, truly, for me?" Victoria nodded. Willa threw herself at Victoria's legs, squeezing tight. Over the child's head, Victoria saw Garrett's expression, gratitude and resentment fighting for dominance. The walk back to the parking lot felt strained. Garrett's silence had weight pressing against Victoria's attempts at casual conversation. When they reached her car, a Tesla Model S, she suddenly wished she'd left it home. He finally signed. "Thank you for the gift. Willa will love it. But Victoria, we need to talk about boundaries." "What boundaries?" "About what's appropriate between friends with very different financial situations." Victoria felt heat rising in her chest. "You mean between rich people and poor people?" Garrett flinched. "I didn't say that." "You implied it." "Garrett, I don't care about money." "But I do." His hands cut the air. "I care that I can't give your daughter, if you had one, a gift worth 1/10 of what you just spent. I care that we're not equal in this friendship." "We are equal. Money always matters." He signed it with finality. "You're just rich enough to pretend it doesn't." Victoria drove home with those words ringing in her head. Equality. As if human worth could be calculated in bank balances. As if Garrett's ability to sign to parent, to create beauty from wood meant less than her ability to acquire properties. But she knew he was right. Money did matter. It created distance, expectations, power imbalances that no amount of good intention could erase. The next week crawled past. Victoria threw herself into work meetings, acquisitions, the never-ending demands of an empire that existed to grow larger. But her mind wandered during presentations, imagining what Garrett was doing. Whether Willa was using the colored pencils. Whether he regretted the friendship already. Wednesday evening, her phone buzzed. Text from Garrett. "Coffee was nice. Thank you for the gift." Willa hasn't stopped drawing. She stared at the message, analyzing it like a contract. Friendly but formal, grateful but distant, the kind of text you sent to acquaintances, not friends. She typed back, "I'm glad she likes them. Maybe we could get together again soon." The response took 12 minutes. "Sure, I'll check my schedule." Thursday, Victoria did something she'd never done, Googled someone she knew personally, typed Garrett Sullivan Seattle into her browser, and watched the minimal results populate. Sullivan Woodcraft had a basic website showcasing furniture photos. No prices listed, everything, contact for quote, the mark of craftsmen who couldn't compete with mass production on cost. A few Yelp reviews praising quality, but noting slow turnaround times. A Facebook page updated sporadically, mostly photos of completed work. Nothing about his personal life. No social media presence. No digital footprint beyond his business. She expanded the search, found a wedding announcement from 12 years ago in the Seattle Times, Diane Margaret Foster to Garrett James Sullivan. The photo showed them impossibly young, glowing with certainty that their story would have a happy ending. Then an obituary from 3 years prior. Diane Foster Sullivan, beloved wife and mother, lost her courageous battle with ALS. Services private. In lieu of flowers, donations to the ALS Association. Victoria read and reread that obituary, trying to imagine the man she'd met being shattered by that loss. Trying to picture him learning sign language as his wife's voice disappeared. Raising a daughter alone while grief hollowed him out. Friday afternoon, her phone rang. Garrett's name on the screen. She answered via text relay service. The operator would voice what she typed, type what Garrett said. "Victoria, it's Garrett. I'm sorry to call, but I wanted to ask, would you like to come to dinner? Nothing fancy, just us at my place. Tomorrow night." The operator's emotionless voice delivered the words, but Victoria imagined them in Garrett's cadence. She typed, "I'd love to. What can I bring?" "Just yourself, 6 o'clock. I'll text you the address." The address arrived minutes later. Victoria inputted into Google Maps a rental house in Georgetown, the kind of neighborhood where chain-link fences outnumbered picket ones. She'd driven through Georgetown exactly once on the way to a warehouse property acquisition, had noticed it the way rich people notice poverty, with abstract pity and immediate dismissal. Now she was going there for dinner. As a guest. A friend. Saturday, she made the same wardrobe mistake, overthinking changing 5 times, landing on jeans and a sweater that cost less than the colored pencils, but still more than Garrett probably spent on clothes in 6 months. The drive took 25 minutes from her downtown penthouse. Victoria watched the cityscape transform from sleek high-rises to industrial buildings to residential blocks where houses sagged with age and deferred maintenance. Garrett's street dead-ended at a train track. His house was a small bungalow with peeling paint and a porch that tilted slightly. Nothing like her penthouse. Nothing like anywhere she'd ever been invited. She parked the Tesla between a pickup truck and a sedan held together by rust and prayer. Suddenly aware of how her car announced wealth, she locked it and hurried to the door. Garrett answered before she could knock, Willa peering around his legs. The interior smelled like garlic and tomato sauce, warm and lived in. Furniture that didn't match but somehow worked. Willa's drawings taped to walls. A life that looked nothing like Victoria's sterile perfection, but felt infinitely more like home. "Come in, dinner's almost ready." The house was small enough that the kitchen opened directly into the living room. Garrett returned to the stove where pasta boiled and sauce simmered. Willa dragged Victoria to see her bedroom, a tiny space dominated by a bed and the handmade pink bookshelf Garrett had mentioned. "Daddy made everything. The bed, the shelf, even my desk. He's the best builder in the whole world." Victoria knelt beside drawings spread across the floor, all done with the colored pencils, each one carefully labeled with Willa's name and date. A child claiming her work, proud of what she'd created. They ate at a table Garrett had clearly made himself, rough-hewn but sturdy. The pasta was simple marinara from a jar, garlic bread salad from a bag. Nothing fancy, nothing pretentious. Victoria couldn't remember the last time she'd enjoyed a meal more. Willa monopolized conversation, signing rapidly about school friends, a boy who'd pulled her hair. Garrett listened with the full attention of parents who knew childhood was brief, already mourning its passage, even as they lived it. After dinner, Willa wanted to watch a movie. Garrett set her up with a Disney film on the small television, then gestured Victoria outside. The back porch overlooked his workshop, a converted garage still lit from earlier work. They sat on steps that needed replacing winter air sharp enough to sting. "Thank you for coming," Garrett signed. "Thank you for inviting me. I wanted to apologize for last week. I was defensive about the pencils." Victoria shook her head. "You were honest. I was thoughtless. I didn't consider how it might feel to receive something you couldn't reciprocate. It's not about keeping score. It's about," he paused, searching for signs that matched his meaning. "It's about feeling like an equal, like I bring something to the table beyond need." "You do. You bring yourself, Willa, this." She gestured at the house, the workshop, the life he'd built from grief and sawdust. "You bring perspective I don't have, connection I've forgotten how to create. But I can't buy you $1,000 gifts, can't take you to nice restaurants, can't—" "I don't want that." Victoria's hands moved urgently. "I have money. I've always had money. It doesn't fill anything. But this tonight, this fills something." Garrett studied her face. "What does it fill, Spring?" "The part that's been empty since my parents died. The part that forgot what it feels like to be wanted for something other than business." They sat in silence, breath fogging in the cold. Victoria thought about her penthouse, expensive, beautiful, devoid of any evidence that a human actually lived there. Compared it to this tilting porch, this patched-together house where a man and his daughter built a life from scraps and love. Which one was poverty? Which one was wealth? "I have a confession," Garrett signed. "I Googled you." Victoria's stomach dropped. And you're not just in real estate. You're the CEO of a $50 million company. Forbes 30 under and society pages. The whole thing. Does it change anything?" "I don't know. Should it?" Victoria turned to face him fully. "I'm the same person who sat crying in her penthouse on Christmas Eve. The same person who threw away sleeping pills because a carpenter and his daughter reminded me that maybe life was worth living. Money doesn't change that. But it changes everything else. Victoria, you live in a world I can't even imagine. I rent this house. I drive a truck with 200,000 miles. Willa's bike came from Craigslist. So what are we doing? Pretending we're friends, that class doesn't matter, that you won't eventually realize you're slumming with the help." The words landed like blows. Victoria felt anger rising, defensive and raw. "Is that what you think, that I'm using you as some charity project, some way to feel good about myself? I think you're lonely, and I think lonely rich people sometimes mistake the convenience of poor people for actual connection." Victoria stood fury, making her clumsy. "Go to hell, Garrett. I came here because I wanted to. Because Willa makes me laugh and you make me feel less alone. If you want to reduce that to economics, fine. But don't pretend you know what my life is like." She started for her car. Garrett caught her arm, spun her around. His face showed anguish. "Not anger, I'm scared." The admission stopped her. She signed, "Of what?" "Of Willa getting attached to you. Of me getting attached. And then you disappearing because this novelty wears off, and you remember you have a real life with real people in it. You think you're not real. I think we're from different worlds, and worlds that different don't mix." Victoria pulled free, headed for her Tesla. Garrett didn't follow. She drove away, watching him shrink in the rearview mirror, a man standing on a broken porch, convinced he wasn't good enough because he'd been taught to measure worth in dollars. The next 3 weeks became an exercise in coexistence without contact. Victoria buried herself in work. Ashford Properties was negotiating a major acquisition, a $25 million commercial complex that would cement her position as Seattle's youngest real estate titan. The deal consumed 16-hour days, meetings with lawyers, accountants, the sellers who kept changing terms, board members who questioned every decision, especially Thomas Bryant, who'd made his disapproval of Victoria's leadership increasingly vocal. "You're distracted," he said during a Friday strategy session. "Ever since the holidays, your focus has been elsewhere." "My focus is exactly where it needs to be, unless you'd like to explain how we've increased revenue 40% under my leadership." Bryant's smile was thin. "Revenue isn't everything. Stability matters. Consistency. The board is concerned you're spreading yourself too thin. Personal entanglements affecting professional judgment." "I have no personal entanglements." "Good. Keep it that way." Victoria left the meeting feeling flayed. Personal entanglements. As if friendship was a liability, as if connection made her weak rather than human. Her phone stayed silent. No text from Garrett, no photos of Willa's latest artwork. The friendship had died as quickly as it had started, another casualty of class warfare. Neither of them had wanted to fight. Mid-January brought complications. The property acquisition stalled when structural inspections revealed foundation issues. 25 million was now potentially 30 million to make the building viable. The board balked. Sellers refused to lower the price. Victoria found herself caught in the middle, bleeding stress from every pore. She worked until midnight most nights, returning to her penthouse only to sleep 4 hours before starting again. Food became an afterthought. Exercise disappeared. She was running on coffee and determination, the way she'd learned to run her entire life. Thursday evening, her assistant Megan knocked on her office door. "Ms. Ashford, there's someone here to see you." "I don't have any appointments." "I know, but he says it's personal." "Garrett Sullivan." Victoria's head snapped up. 4 weeks since their fight, and now he appeared at her office. "Send him in." Garrett entered wearing work clothes, sawdust still visible on his jeans. He looked out of place among the glass and steel, a rough-hewn piece of reality in her polished world. He signed it without preamble. "You haven't answered my texts." "What texts?" Confusion crossed his face. He pulled out his phone, showed her a thread of messages dating back 2 weeks, all sent to a number that wasn't hers. "I changed phones," Victoria signed. "New security protocol. I thought you'd stop talking to me. I thought you'd decided I was right, about us being too different." They stared at each other across her enormous desk, misunderstanding evaporating to reveal the fragile want beneath. "I miss you," Victoria signed. The admission cost her visible in the tension of her shoulders. "I miss Willa. I miss feeling like someone wanted me around for reasons that had nothing to do with profit margins." Garrett moved around the desk, stood close enough that she had to tilt her head to see his face. "I miss you too. Willa asked about you constantly. Wants to know when you're coming back." "Do you want me to come back?" Instead of answering with signs, he leaned down and kissed her. Brief, gentle, a question posed in physical form. Victoria froze, then kissed back her hands, coming up to grip his flannel shirt, pulling him closer. This was different from any kiss she'd experienced. No calculation, no performance. Just want pure and uncomplicated. They broke apart. Garrett's eyes were wide. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." "Don't apologize." Victoria's voice emerged rusty, unpracticed. "Don't ever apologize for that." His hands found hers, calloused fingers threading through smooth ones. "I don't know how to do this, how to be with someone when there's such a gulf between our lives. Then we figure it out together. No script, no expectations. Just trying." Trying, he repeated the word, tasting like hope. They stood there in her office, overlooking Elliott Bay, two people from opposite ends of Seattle's economic spectrum, holding hands like teenagers discovering the possibility of connection. Victoria's phone buzzed, another crisis demanding attention. She ignored it. For the first time in 3 years, something mattered more than work. The following weeks became a careful dance of building something neither could name. Not quite dating, they had Willa to consider, and both carried too much baggage for romance's easy categories. But not just friendship either, not with the way Garrett's eyes tracked Victoria across rooms, the way her pulse jumped when his text arrived. They established rhythms. Tuesday dinners at Garrett's house, where Victoria learned to cook badly while Willa provided commentary. Saturday mornings at Pike Place Market, Willa between them, holding both their hands. Occasional evenings when Willa stayed with Mrs. Clara and Garrett came to the penthouse, both of them awed by the strangeness of their togetherness. Victoria discovered she liked domestic chaos, liked stepping over Willa's scattered toys, liked the way Garrett's house smelled like wood and coffee, liked being needed for things that had nothing to do with her money. One evening, washing dishes side by side while Willa did homework at the kitchen table, Garrett signed, "I'm falling for you, and it terrifies me." Victoria's hands stilled in the soapy water. "Why terrifying?" "Because this can't work long term. You know it can't." "I don't know that." Victoria, look around. "This is my life. Small house, struggling business, single dad with limited time. You're a CEO worth 50 million. What happens when you realize what you're giving up for this?" "I'm not giving up anything. I'm gaining everything I've been missing." But doubt had crept into his expression, the old insecurity money had planted. Victoria wanted to argue to prove through logic that love, if that's what this was becoming, transcended economics. But she'd learned that certain convictions couldn't be talked away, only lived past. February brought Valentine's Day with its commercial pressure to perform romance. Garrett surprised her by transforming his workshop into something magical: fairy lights strung between rafters, candles on sawhorses, a table set with mismatched dishes, and wildflowers in a mason jar. Victoria arrived straight from work, still in her suit, and felt something crack open in her chest at the sight. He'd done this for her, created beauty from scraps because he wanted to, not because he could afford elaborate gestures. They ate pasta he'd made from scratch, drank wine from the grocery store, talked until candle wax pooled on improvised holders. When the workshop grew cold, Garrett draped his jacket over her shoulders. It smelled like sawdust, and him and Victoria wanted to wrap herself in it forever. Later, alone in the house while Willa slept, Victoria produced her gift, a watch Patek Philippe $22,000 timepiece as art. She'd seen Garrett check his phone constantly for the time his wrist bare since some watch had broken, and he hadn't replaced it. His face when he opened the box cycled through shock, awe, and something darker. "Victoria, I can't accept this." "Why not?" "Because it costs $22,000. Because I brought you homemade pasta, and you brought me a watch worth more than my truck." "It's a gift. Gifts aren't transactions, but they create debt." His hands moved sharply, frustration bleeding through control. "I can never reciprocate this, never give you something equivalent. And every time I look at it, I'll remember that." Victoria felt heat rising. "So I'm supposed to pretend I'm not wealthy, buy you things from Target, so you feel better about yourself. I'm supposed to feel like an equal partner, not a charity case. You're not. Then why haven't you told anyone about us?" The question landed like an ambush. Victoria's hands froze mid-sign. "What? Your friends, colleagues, anyone in your world? Have you mentioned that you're seeing someone?" The silence stretched answer enough. Garrett's expression hardened. "That's what I thought." "Garrett, it's complicated." "It's not complicated. You're ashamed of me." "That's not true." "Then what is it? Why am I good enough for private dinners but not good enough to acknowledge publicly?" Victoria struggled for words that wouldn't sound like excuses. "Because people will judge, will think you're with me for money, will question my judgment." "So you agree with them?" "What? No. You think I'm not good enough." A carpenter from Georgetown who learned his trade from his father. Why would Victoria Ashford, CEO and heiress, admit to being with someone like that? The words came from deep wounds, old scars reopened. Victoria reached for him, but he stepped back, shaking his head. "I can't do this, can't pretend that your world and mine have any overlap. You'll always be wondering if I'm using you. I'll always be wondering when you'll wake up and realize you can do better." "Garrett, please. I need time to think about whether love is enough when everything else is impossible." He walked her to her car, distant now, the intimacy of dinner dissolved into formality. Victoria drove away, crying mascara, running, chest aching, with the particular pain of losing something before fully possessing it. The Tesla's navigation guided her automatically toward downtown, toward her penthouse, toward the life that had been waiting all along to reclaim her. She thought about Garrett's face when he'd seen the watch. Not gratitude, but humiliation, the gift transformed into evidence of inequality. Maybe he was right. Maybe their worlds were too far apart. Maybe loving someone across class lines was a fantasy rich people told themselves, while poor people lived the brutal reality of never measuring up. Victoria parked in her building's underground garage, rode the elevator to the 40th floor, entered her immaculate penthouse. Everything in place. Everything perfect. Everything exactly as it had been on Christmas Eve when she'd stood considering her options. She walked to the window, pressed her forehead against cold glass, and let herself grieve. Not just for Garrett, though that loss was immediate and sharp, but for the glimpse she'd had of a different life, one where worth wasn't measured in acquisitions and profit margins, where connection mattered more than control, where she could be Victoria instead of Ms. Ashford woman, instead of CEO human, instead of machine. Her phone buzzed. A text from Megan. "Board meeting moved to 8 a.m. tomorrow. Bryant pushing vote of no confidence. You need to prepare." Victoria closed her eyes. Of course. The acquisition had stalled, her attention had wavered, and sharks smelled blood. Brian had been waiting for weakness, any crack to exploit. She should spend tonight at preparing. Marshalling arguments, gathering data, shoring up support among board members who respected results but questioned her judgment. Instead, she stood at the window and wondered if Garrett was right, if she'd been pretending all along. Playing it normal while remaining fundamentally separate, unable to bridge the gap between her reality and everyone else's. The city glittered below 52 million different lives she'd never touch. Somewhere out there, Garrett was probably explaining to Willa why Victoria wouldn't be coming around anymore. The child would be confused hurt. Another adult who'd appeared and vanished, teaching her that attachment meant loss. Victoria pulled out her phone, opened the text thread with Garrett's correct number. Typed, "I'm sorry for everything. You deserve better than my uncertainty." Deleted it, typed again. "I love you. I don't know if that's enough, but it's true." Deleted that too. Settled on, "Thank you for showing me what I was missing. I understand if you need space." Sent it before she could reconsider. Watched the screen for a response that didn't come. Monday morning arrived with the board meeting Victoria had been dreading. Thomas Bryant came prepared with ammunition charts showing her reduced hours, the stalled acquisition questions about her personal distractions. "Ms. Ashford has done excellent work," he conceded with false magnanimity. "But perhaps the pressure of leadership has become too much. Perhaps she needs support, a co-CEO arrangement, for instance. Code for you're failing and we're taking over." Victoria fought back with numbers acquisitions, the 40% profit increase she generated. But Brian had done his homework, found her vulnerabilities, exploited them with surgical precision. The vote came down to 7-5 in her favor. She kept her position but lost authority. Every major decision now required board approval. She was CEO in name only, neutered by men who'd been waiting 3 years to prove a deaf woman and couldn't run their company. She left the meeting feeling hollowed out. Drove home at 2 in the afternoon, unprecedented for someone who usually worked 12-hour days. Her assistant's concerned text went unanswered. The penthouse felt like a mausoleum. Victoria stood in the living room she'd decorated with professional help, surrounded by furniture, chosen to impress rather than comfort, and realized Garrett had been right about everything. This wasn't wealth. This was isolation with better thread count. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her check. Willa's face appeared on the video call, the girl's eyes red from crying. "Vic, Mom, Daddy won't tell me why you stopped visiting." Did I do something wrong? The name Vic Mom hit like a fist. When had Willa started calling her that? And why did it hurt so much to hear it now? Victoria's voice emerged broken. "No, baby, you didn't do anything wrong." "Then why won't you come back?" Daddy said. "I'm and Hope misses you too." The golden retriever's face appeared in frame, tail wagging at Victoria's voice. When had they gotten into it? How much had she missed in the week since Valentine's? Willa, it's complicated. That's what grown-ups always say when they don't want to explain. The 7-year-old's perception was devastating. But it's not complicated. Either you want to be our family or you don't. Family. The word Victoria had been avoiding the label that made this real and terrifying and impossible to dismiss as casual friendship. I do want that, more than anything. Then come back. Willa's logic was beautiful in its simplicity. Daddy thinks you are too good for us, but you're not. You're just Vic, and Vic belongs with us. The call ended when Garrett discovered what Willa had done, his mortified face appearing briefly before the screen went dark. But the damage or gift, Victoria wasn't sure which had been done. She sat in her empty penthouse, holding a phone that connected her to a life she'd convinced herself was impossible, and made a decision that terrified her more than any business deal. If she wanted that life, wanted Garrett, wanted Willa, wanted the messy, beautiful chaos of belonging, she would have to fight for it. Not with money or power or the tools she'd always used to win, with vulnerability, with honesty, with public admission that the CEO of Ashford Properties had fallen in love with a carpenter from Georgetown. And that meant doing something she'd never done, letting the world see her as human, first successful, second complete, with all the complication that entailed. Victoria stood, smoothed her suit, and began planning. Not for a board meeting or acquisition, but for a gesture that would prove to Garrett and herself that some things mattered more than maintaining the walls that kept her safe and alone. Victoria spent 3 days planning what would either save her or destroy her completely. Sleep became theoretical, existing only in 20-minute intervals between brainstorming sessions she conducted alone in her penthouse. Megan noticed but knew better than to ask questions when her boss spiraled into obsessive focus. The plan crystallized Tuesday evening while Victoria stood in her closet staring at suits that had become armor, wondering when protection had calcified into prison. She pulled out her phone, texted Megan, "Schedule press conference for Friday, 2 p.m. Grand Hyatt Ballroom. Invite everyone, board members, business press, Seattle Times local TV stations." Megan's response came instantly. Topic: personal announcement. Ms. Ashford, the board will want details. They'll get them Friday with everyone else. Wednesday morning brought pushback. Thomas Bryant called her office directly, rare enough that Megan forwarded it to Victoria's cell with apologetic urgency. The relay operator's voice translated Bryant's words into text. "What the hell are you doing? Victoria, a press conference about personal matters. The board hasn't authorized this." Victoria typed her response for the operator to voice, "The board doesn't control my personal modem. This announcement doesn't concern Ashford Properties business. Everything you do concerns this company. You represent us. I represent myself. If you don't like it, vote me out, but you can't stop me from speaking." She hung up before he could respond, hands shaking with adrenaline. She'd just declared war on the board that barely tolerated her leadership. After Friday, they'd either accept her humanity or destroy her career. Possibly both. The next 2 days became exercises in controlled terror. Victoria wrote and rewrote her speech, each draft revealing new vulnerabilities she wasn't sure she could expose. Saying "I'm in love" to a room full of business associates felt like stripping naked in public. Admitting that love was with a carpenter, someone the board would immediately calculate, as Fortune Hunter risked everything she'd built. But Willa's voice echoed constantly. "Either you want to be our family or you don't." Family required courage Victoria had never needed for acquisitions or negotiations. Business was chess strategy, logic, predictable moves. This was free fall without guarantee of landing. Thursday night, she tried on 7 different outfits before settling on a navy suit that was professional without being corporate armor. She needed to look like a CEO making an important announcement, not a woman having a breakdown. Though maybe those were the same thing. Her phone stayed silent. Garrett hadn't responded to her last text, hadn't acknowledged Willa's call. He was probably trying to protect his daughter from further disappointment, teaching her the hard lesson Victoria had learned at 7: don't get attached because everyone leaves. Except Victoria was done leaving. Done running from connection because it scared her. Done pretending wealth substituted for human warmth. Friday morning arrived with rain that matched Seattle's temperamental February mood. Victoria woke at 5 after dreaming about her parents, not the plane crash, but the last Christmas they'd shared. Her father signing, "We're proud of who you are, not what you achieve." She'd forgotten that distinction. Let achievement consume identity until she'd become nothing but net worth and quarterly reports. The Grand Hyatt Ballroom filled quickly. Megan had done her job too well. Every major business reporter in Seattle, 3 TV crews, photographers from society pages Victoria usually avoided. The board members sat together in the front row, Bryant's expression promising retribution. Victoria stood backstage listening to crowd murmur she couldn't hear, but felt through the floor's vibration. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold her notes. Megan appeared at her elbow, signing, "5 minutes. You ready?" "No." "You're going to do great, whatever this is about." Victoria signed back, "Thank you for everything, especially if I'm unemployed Monday." Megan's eyes widened, but she didn't ask questions, just squeezed Victoria's arm and disappeared to manage logistics. 2 p.m. arrived with mechanical precision. Victoria walked onto the stage steps, echoing in the ballroom's acoustic space. Microphone waited on the podium, useless for her but necessary for the audience. A sign language interpreter stood to the side, ready to translate her words. She looked out at faces waiting for explanation. Bryant front and center, arms crossed. Business reporters with pens poised. Photographers adjusting lenses. All of them expecting corporate news, merger, acquisition stepping down. None of them prepared for what she was about to say. Victoria pulled out her phone, opened the text-to-speech app she'd relied on for years, typed her opening, let the mechanical voice fill the room. Thank you for coming. This announcement isn't about Ashford Properties, it's about me. Confusion rippled through the audience. Bryant leaned forward, clearly calculating damage control strategies. Victoria continued typing each word appearing on the screen behind her for clarity. My name is Victoria Ashford. I'm 32 years old. I've been CEO of my family's company for 3 years. I'm worth approximately $52 million. Pause. Let them absorb the confirmation of numbers they'd all estimated. And none of that defines who I am. She set down the phone, let her voice emerge, rough, unpracticed, the words slurring slightly but comprehensible. 3 months ago, I was suicidal. I had everything money could buy and nothing that mattered. Then I met someone who changed that. Victoria switched to sign language, now the interpreter voicing her hands. Garrett Sullivan is a carpenter. He makes furniture by hand in a workshop in Georgetown. He earns maybe $40,000 a year. He's a widower raising a 7-year-old daughter alone. She watched Bryant's face shift from confusion to dawning horror as he realized where this was going. I love him. I love his daughter. And I've been hiding that love because I was afraid of exactly this judgment from people who think wealth determines worth, who measure relationships by economic compatibility instead of emotional truth. The room had gone silent. Photographers stopped shooting, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Victoria's hands moved faster now, the interpreter struggling to keep pace. Garrett thinks he's not good enough for me. He thinks the distance between our bank accounts creates an unbridgeable gap. He's wrong. The gap is in how we've learned to value ourselves. Her voice emerged again clearer. I was taught that success equals money, that achievement is measured in quarterly reports, that vulnerability is weakness and needing people is failure. She looked directly at Bryant. Some of you built careers reinforcing those beliefs, telling yourselves that the people who serve you, who cook your food, build your furniture, clean your homes, are lesser because they lack capital. The interpreter signed furiously, translating Victoria's spoken words. But those people know something we've forgotten. They know that work has dignity regardless of pay, that creating beauty matters whether it sells for hundreds or thousands, that love doesn't require a prenup. Victoria felt tears starting, but didn't stop them. Garrett taught me that strength isn't conquering loneliness, it's admitting you're lonely and asking for help. That being seen matters more than being successful. That family isn't blood, it's the people who stay when you have nothing to offer but yourself. She switched back to signing, her hands shaking. I'm standing here, risking my career, my reputation, everything I've built to tell him and anyone listening, I choose connection over control. I choose love over wealth. I choose the life where I matter because of who I am, not what I own. The interpreter's voice carried Victoria's next words to the silent room. Garrett, if you're watching, I know you're not. You're probably working. You don't watch TV during business hours, but if someone shows you this, you were right. I was ashamed, not of you, of myself, of how little I believed in my own worth without money attached. She was crying openly now, mascara running. You asked why I hadn't told anyone about us. Because I was terrified they'd confirm what I already feared, that I don't know how to be a person, only a CEO. That without my title and money, I'm nothing. Victoria's hands stilled, her voice dropping to barely above whisper. But you and Willa showed me different. Showed me that I could be wanted for things that have nothing to do with quarterly earnings. That my value isn't contingent on profit margins. She looked directly into the nearest camera. I don't know if you'll forgive me, if you'll trust that this isn't some rich person's fantasy that'll evaporate when reality gets hard. But I'm fighting for us now, publicly, irreversibly, because you taught me that courage isn't avoiding fear, it's choosing love despite being terrified. The final words emerged in signed Garrett Sullivan. I love you, I love Willa, I choose you both, forever if you'll have me. Well, Victoria stepped back from the podium. The ballroom erupted, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, Bryant's face purpling with rage. She ignored all of it, walking off stage with as much dignity as she could marshal, while her entire professional life imploded behind her. Megan waited in the wings, eyes wide. Holy shit. Victoria nodded. Indeed. The board is going to, I know, let them. I meant every word. Her phone started buzzing before she'd reached the parking lot. Texts, emails, calls from numbers she didn't recognize. She ignored them all, driving toward Georgetown with single-minded focus. If Garrett had seen the press conference, unlikely given he'd be working, someone would tell him soon. She wanted to be there when he found out. The workshop was open, Garrett visible through windows, bent over a table. Victoria parked and sat trying to calm her racing heart. What if he was angry? What if public declaration felt like pressure instead of proof? What if she just destroyed his privacy for nothing? The workshop door opened. Garrett emerged, phone in hand, expression unreadable. He walked to her car, tapped on the window. Victoria got out, standing on uncertain legs. You held a press conference, he signed. I did. Told all of Seattle you're in love with a poor carpenter. Technically, I told them you make $40,000 a year. That's not poverty, it's... He kissed her, cutting off the nervous explanation. His hands cupped her face, thumbs, wiping tears she hadn't realized were still falling. When they broke apart, he signed it, you're insane. Probably. Your board is going to fire you. Almost definitely. And you did this anyway. Victoria nodded. Had to. You needed to know, needed everyone to know that I'm done pretending we're too different to work. Done letting other people's judgment matter more than what we've built. Garrett's expression shifted through emotions too fast to track. Finally, he signed, I watched. Someone showed me on their phone. Saw you crying, saying all those things, risking everything. And I realized I've been just as afraid as you, maybe more. I convinced myself you'd leave because it was easier than believing you'd stay. Safer to push you away than risk being left. He took her hands, his calloused fingers rough against her smooth ones. But you just proved you are not leaving. You burned your bridges on live television. Victoria laughed, slightly hysterical. Is that romantic? I can't tell if it's romantic or unhinged. Both, definitely both. The workshop door opened again. Willa emerged, a golden retriever bounding beside her. The girl stopped when she saw Victoria's eyes going wide. Vic, Mom, Victoria knelt as Willa ran, catching the child's flying tackle hug. The dog jumped around them, tail wagging frantically, the three of them creating a tangle of limbs and fur and joy. You came back, Willa signed, against Victoria's shoulder. I knew you would. I'm sorry I stayed away. I was scared. Of what? Of not being good enough for you and your daddy. Willa pulled back, signing with fierce certainty. That's silly. You're perfect for us. Garrett joined them, making it a group hug that felt like coming home. When they finally separated, Willa demanded, Are you staying this time for real? Victoria looked at Garrett, saw the question in his eyes too. This was commitment's moment, the point where theoretical became actual. If you'll have me, if your dad wants, Garrett kissed her again, softer this time. I want everything. You, us, the whole terrifying mess of figuring out how two different worlds become one. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile is. They stood in the February drizzle, 3 people and a dog, building the shape of family from want and bravery and the willingness to believe love mattered more than logic. Victoria's phone buzzed insistently. She checked it, 47 missed calls, twice that in texts. Brian's name appeared most frequently, messages escalating from professionally angry to unprofessionally furious. I should probably check these. Garrett took the phone, turned it off, handed it back. Tomorrow. Today, you're with us. The pronouncement felt like permission to ignore responsibility for the first time in Victoria's adult life. She let herself be led inside the workshop where Willa showed off furniture pieces in progress. Hope sprawled on sawdust piles, and Garrett explained the properties of different woods with the passion of someone who'd found his calling. Evening came with the particular softness of Pacific Northwest winter. They migrated to the house where Garrett cooked dinner, while Victoria attempted to help and mostly got in the way. Willa set the table with mismatched plates, narrating her day at school with theatrical flair. They ate pasta, apparently Garrett's signature dish, and Victoria realized this was her favorite meal ever, not because of complexity or cost, but because it tasted like belonging. After dinner, Willa monopolized Victoria's attention, demanding they play with the colored pencils that had started everything. They sprawled on the living room floor, while Garrett cleaned up, drawing pictures of our family, 4 figures, now including Hope, all holding hands. You have to stay forever now, Willa announced, coloring Victoria's hair with yellow that looked nothing like her actual blonde. Because I already drew you in. The child logic was irrefutable. Victoria signed, then I guess I'm staying. Bedtime arrived with Willa's protest that she wasn't tired despite obvious exhaustion. Garrett carried her to bed, Victoria following. They tucked her in together, the routine feeling natural as breathing. Vic, Mom, will you read to me? Victoria picked up the book on the nightstand, some story about princesses and dragons, and began signing the words while speaking them aloud. Willa's eyes drifted closed before page 3, but Victoria finished the chapter anyway, unwilling to break the spell. In the hallway outside Willa's room, Garrett pulled Victoria close. She's going to get so attached. Good, I'm already attached. What happens when the newness wears off? When you remember you have a penthouse and I have this falling apart rental? Victoria touched his face, making him look at her. Stop borrowing trouble. We'll figure it out day by day. You're going to get frustrated with how small my world is. Your world isn't small, it's real. Mine was a small one, $52 million, and no one to share it with. They kissed in the dimly lit hallway, surrounded by Willa's artwork and the smell of sawdust that clung to everything Garrett owned. Victoria had never felt richer. Later, after she'd driven home to her penthouse, the reality of her press conference hit with delayed impact. She turned on her phone, watched messages flood in. Some supportive friends she'd forgotten she had expressing surprise and happiness. Some curious business associates wanting details. Many condemning board members, business partners, people who saw her confession as weakness or manipulation. Bryant had sent 17 messages escalating from "call me immediately" to "emergency board meeting Monday morning" to "you've destroyed this company's reputation." Victoria read them all with strange detachment. These were the people she'd spent 3 years trying to impress, convince, prove herself to. Their approval had seemed essential, their judgment deadly. Now it felt irrelevant. What did Bryant's opinion matter compared to Willa's trust? What did board approval mean against Garrett's love? She typed a response to Bryant's latest tirade. I'll be at the Monday meeting. Do what you need to do you. I've already made my choice. Saturday brought unexpected consequences. Victoria's phone rang at 7 a.m. Her father's oldest friend, Marcus Chen, who'd served on the Ashford Properties Board since before Victoria was born. Victoria, I saw your press conference. She braced for disappointment. I know it was unconventional. It was brave. Your parents would be proud. The words hit like absolution. Victoria's throat tightened. You think so? Your father built this company because he loved creating value, not because he loved money. He'd tell you the same thing. I'm about to. Life's too short to spend it alone, and love matters more than quarterly reports. Marcus paused. That said, Bryant's out for blood. Monday's meeting won't be pleasant. I know. Are you prepared to lose your position? Victoria thought about Garrett's workshop, Willa's drawings, the family she'd found in unexpected places. I'm prepared to fight for it. But if fighting means choosing between the CEO title and the people I love, I choose them. Good answer. I'll do what I can to help Monday. But Victoria, this won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile is. She echoed Garrett's words, finding truth in the repetition. The weekend became a careful balance between her two worlds. Saturday morning at Pike Place Market with Garrett and Willa buying ingredients for dinner, while tourists photographed the fish-throwing vendors. Afternoon in her penthouse reviewing financials and preparing for Monday's confrontation. Sunday they drove to Discovery Park, Willa running ahead with hope, while Garrett and Victoria walked hand in hand. The February air bit cold, Puget Sound spreading gray-blue to the horizon. What happens if they fire you? Garrett signed in. I find something else. Consulting maybe. Or I could, Victoria paused, surprising herself with the thought forming. I could actually take time, figure out what I want beyond proving myself. Can you afford that? She laughed. I'm worth $52 million, Garrett. I could not work for the rest of my life. But you'd go crazy. Probably. But maybe there's something between workaholic CEO and complete retirement. Maybe I could find work that matters without consuming me. They walked in silence, watching Willa throw sticks for Hope to retrieve. The dog bounded through underbrush with puppy enthusiasm despite being middle-aged. Garrett signed, I'm scared this is too good, that something will break it. What if nothing breaks it? What if we just are happy? That feels impossible. Victoria stopped walking, turned to face him. Your wife died, my parents died. We both learned that happiness is temporary, that loss is inevitable. But Garrett, we can't live like we're already grieving. At some point, we have to choose hope. His eyes reflected pain and possibility in equal measure. Hope is harder than grief. Grief at least is certain. Then let's be uncertain together. Choose hope even when it terrifies us. He kissed her there in the park with Willa and Hope as witnesses, and Victoria felt something settle in her chest. This was real. This was hers. Whatever Monday brought, she had this. Monday morning arrived with rain that turned Seattle streets into rivers. Victoria dressed in her sharpest suit armor one final time and drove to Ashford Properties with her resignation letter in her bag. She'd fight for her position, but she wouldn't beg. Some things were more important than titles. The boardroom filled with familiar faces, all wearing expressions ranging from sympathetic to hostile. Bryant sat at the head of the table, clearly having positioned himself as leader of this coup. He didn't wait for formalities. Ms. Ashford, your behavior Friday was unacceptable. You used company resources to stage a personal spectacle that reflected poorly on Ashford Properties' reputation. Victoria signed her response, the interpreter translating, I used a hotel ballroom I paid for personally and invited press on my own time. No company resources were involved. You represent this company. Your actions reflect on us. My personal life is not company business. Bryant's smile was thin. When your personal life involves public declarations that make us look unstable, it becomes our business. The board has discussed this and we're recommending you step down as CEO. We'll position it as wanting to focus on family, very sympathetic. Marcus Chen spoke up. Thomas, that's premature. We haven't even discussed. There's nothing to discuss. Victoria has shown herself incapable of separating personal from professional. She's a liability. Victoria stood, hands moving with precise calm. I won't step down. If you want me gone, vote me out. But I've done nothing that warrants removal. I've increased this company's value by 40%, negotiated acquisitions none of you thought possible, and maintained profitability through economic uncertainty. None of that matters if you're emotionally unstable. Falling in love isn't instability, it's being human, something this board seems to have forgotten. She looked around the table, making eye contact with each member. My parents built this company on the principle that real estate creates community, that buildings matter because people matter. When did we forget that? When did we decide that profit margins mattered more than the lives we're actually living? Brian's face reddened. This isn't philosophy class, Victoria. This is business. Business run by people who apparently think vulnerability is weakness, that needing others makes you unfit to lead. But I'd argue the opposite, leaders who can't admit they need help make terrible decisions because they're too proud to ask for input. Marcus nodded. She has a point, Thomas. She's had a mental breakdown on television. She told the truth about her life. When did honesty become breakdown? The debate raged for 90 minutes. Bryant pushed for immediate removal. Marcus and two other board members defended Victoria. The remainder vacillated, clearly uncomfortable with both options. Finally, the vote came. 7-5, Victoria retained her position by the narrowest possible margin. But the victory felt Pyrrhic. She'd won the title while losing half the board's confidence. Bryant's parting shot as the meeting dissolved. This isn't over. One mistake, Victoria. That's all I need. She gathered her materials, hands shaking from adrenaline. Marcus caught her in the hallway. You made powerful enemies today. I know. Was it worth it? Victoria thought about Willa's drawings, Garrett's kisses, the family waiting for her in Georgetown. Absolutely. The next 6 months became a masterclass in balancing incompatible worlds. Victoria maintained her CEO role while Bryant and his allies questioned every decision. She worked 60-hour weeks but refused to sacrifice evenings and weekends with Garrett and Willa. Her penthouse began accumulating evidence of life. Willa's drawings on the fridge, Garrett's flannel shirt draped over a chair, Hope's dog bed in the corner. The sterile perfection gave way to comfortable chaos. Garrett's house got similar treatment. Victoria bought a proper dining table, not expensive but sturdy, something that could handle family dinners. She hired someone to fix the tilting porch, replace rotting boards. Small improvements that didn't erase the house's character but made it safer. They navigated challenges neither had anticipated. Willa acting out when Victoria traveled for business testing, whether this adult would also disappear. Garrett's discomfort when Victoria's wealth became unavoidable. The Tesla, the expensive restaurants colleagues expected for business dinners, the casual mentions of property values that exceeded his annual income. But they learned, developed rhythms. Tuesday dinners at Garrett's, Thursday nights at the Pennant House. Saturdays belonged to Willa Park's museums, the ordinary magic of watching a child discover her world. Sundays were for sleeping, late lazy mornings the three of them, and hope piled on someone's couch. Victoria discovered she liked domesticity's small rituals, liked packing Willa's lunch even though she did it badly, liked watching Garrett work in his shop, the meditative focus as he transformed raw wood into beauty, liked being needed for things that had nothing to do with profit margins. Garrett learned to let Victoria contribute financially without feeling diminished. They established ground rules she could pay for things that benefited all of them but wouldn't fix his business or house without permission. Investment, yes. Takeover, no. Partnership instead of charity. Willa thrived. Her teacher reported improved confidence, better social skills. The child who'd been quietly grieving her mother began blooming with the stability of two adults who adored her. February had brought an unexpected addition when Willa begged them to visit the animal shelter. Hope, a 3-year-old golden retriever with graying muzzle and gentle eyes, had been surrendered by an elderly owner who'd moved to assisted living. The dog took to Willa immediately, and Victoria found herself signing adoption papers before she'd fully processed the decision. Now hope was woven into their fabric, another thread connecting Victoria to this life she was building. August brought Willa's 8th birthday. Victoria organized a party at the penthouse, risky given the potential for kids to destroy expensive things, but worth it to see Willa's face when 20 classmates explored the space with appropriate awe. Garrett stood beside Victoria on the balcony, watching children shriek over birthday cake. A year ago, I thought we'd spend her birthday alone, just us pretending to be okay. And now she's got a whole village. He gestured at kids' parents, Mrs. Clara, who'd become surrogate grandmother. Because you gave us that. Victoria shook her head. We gave each other that. You taught me what family means. I just had the space to host the party. They'd learned that dance, accepting what each contributed without hierarchy of value. His time and skill mattered equally to her money and connections. Different resources, same commitment. Fall arrived with Victoria making an announcement that shocked her board. She was stepping down as CEO. Not fired, not forced out, but choosing to become board chair instead. Reduced hours, reduced stress, reduced need to prove herself daily to people who'd never fully accept her. Brian had finally gotten what he wanted, her exit, but the victory rang hollow since she had orchestrated it on her terms. She recommended her COO as replacement, a woman she'd been mentoring, who'd run the company competently while Victoria built the life she actually wanted. The transition took 3 months. By Thanksgiving, Victoria was working 30 hours weekly instead of 60 plus, had time for school pickups and homework help and all the ordinary parenting tasks she'd been missing. Garrett proposed on Christmas Eve, not at a fancy restaurant or romantic getaway, but at Café Knoll, where they'd first reconnected. Same corner table, same ritual. He didn't kneel, just took her hand and signed, "Will you marry me? Will you be Willa's mom officially? Will you build this life with us forever?" The ring was simple sapphire because he remembered her mentioning it was her favorite stone. Cost maybe $2,000, probably a month's earnings for him. Victoria cried, saying yes, slipping the ring on her finger and feeling it settle like it belonged there. Willa shrieked with joy, attracting attention from nearby tables. Hope barked, sensing excitement. They married in March, small ceremony at the courthouse with Willa as witness and Marcus Chen giving Victoria away. No society wedding, no guest list politics, just them making legal what had been true for months. The media coverage was surprisingly positive. The CEO who'd fallen for a carpenter became a feel-good story, proof that love transcended class. Victoria hated the narrative's simplicity, but appreciated that public opinion had shifted from scandal to support. Their honeymoon was a week at the San Juan Islands, Victoria's choice of location, Garrett's budget for activities. They hiked, kayaked, let Willa explore tide pools while Hope barked at seagulls. No 5-star resorts or expensive excursions. Just time unhurried and sweet. Victoria sold the penthouse in June. Couldn't justify keeping it when she spent 90% of nights at the Georgetown house anyway. She and Garrett bought a place together, nothing extravagant, but solid in a neighborhood with good schools. Big enough for Willa to have her own room, for Victoria to have an office, for Garrett to have a workshop in the converted garage. Equal down payment, equal mortgage. They'd fought about it, Victoria wanting to buy outright, Garrett insisting on contribution, until they'd compromised on partnership. Her money mattered, but so did his pride. They learned to honor both. 2 years after that Christmas Eve, when Victoria had contemplated suicide, she found herself back at Cafe Noel with her family. Annual tradition now commemorating the night everything changed. Willa was 9, sprouting into the person she'd become, confident, kind, fluent in ASL and English both. Hope sprawled under the table, graying around the muzzle, but still game for adventures. Garrett sat across from Victoria, wedding ring, catching light, his face carrying the particular contentment of someone who'd found his place. The waitress didn't know, their story brought hot chocolate for Willa, coffee for Garrett, tea for Victoria. Same order, different year. Victoria looked around the crowded cafe, families celebrating, couples, dating friends, catching up. She used to watch from outside, observer of lives she couldn't access. Now she was part of the scene, woven into the fabric of human connection. "What are you thinking?" Garrett signed. "That 2 years ago I wanted to tea, and now I want to live so much it scares me." Good scared or bad scared? Good, definitely good. Willa interrupted their moment by showing Victoria a drawing, the three of them, plus Hope, rendered in colored pencils, that had started everything. The figures held hands, smiling wider than anatomy allowed. Childish and perfect. "For you, Vic Mom, for our anniversary." Victoria traced the crayon lines, throat tight. "It's beautiful, baby. We're beautiful. Our family." The simple declaration carried weight of earned truth. They were beautiful, not despite their complications, but because of them. Beauty wasn't perfection. It was broken people choosing wholeness together. Later, walking to their car through December rain, Victoria thought about the sleeping pills she'd thrown away 2 years ago, about the woman who'd stood in a penthouse contemplating oblivion. That Victoria felt like someone else entirely, a ghost she'd exorcised through the terrifying act of letting herself be loved. She wasn't fixed, still struggled with control issues, still defaulted to money when emotions got complicated, still had moments of wondering if she deserved this happiness. But she'd learned something more valuable than healing. That love didn't require being whole first. That family happened in the messy middle of becoming, not after some perfect transformation. Garrett caught her hand, squeezed. "You okay?" "More than okay, grateful." They drove home, their home, the one they'd chosen together, and Victoria marveled at how ordinary it had become. This life she'd thought impossible was now just life. Wake up, make breakfast, drop, Willa at school, work, dinner, homework, help, bedtime stories, sleep tangled around Garrett. Ordinary. Beautiful. Enough. That night, after Willa was asleep and Hope snoring in her bed, Victoria and Garrett sat in their living room. The Christmas tree they decorated together stood in the corner, lights reflecting off windows. "Do you ever miss it?" Garrett signed. The penthouse, the CEO title, the power. Victoria considered carefully. "I miss the simplicity of knowing my worth through numbers. Money's easy, either you have it or you don't. But this," she gestured at their life, "this is harder to quantify. How do you measure love? How do you calculate the value of Willa calling me mom, of waking up next to you every morning? You can't." "Exactly. So I had to learn a whole new kind of math. One where worth isn't about what you own, but who you are when everything's stripped away." Whoosh, Garrett pulled her close. "And who are you?" A woman who almost gave up before she found her reason to stay. A mom figuring it out day by day. A wife learning that needing someone isn't weakness. A person who finally understands that the richest thing you can be is loved. They sat in comfortable silence, watching tree lights blink in patterns. Outside, Seattle continued its rain-soaked existence. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Garrett's business had slow periods. Victoria's former colleagues still whispered about her choices. Willa's school presented constant new dramas. But tonight, in this house they'd built together, Victoria Ashford Sullivan felt something she'd spent 34 years chasing through all the wrong avenues: peace. Not the absence of struggle, the presence of purpose. The knowledge that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. Garrett's hands moved in the dimness. "I love you." Victoria signed back, "I love you too." Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for teaching me that being heard doesn't require sound, for showing me that family is built by choice, not just by blood. Thank you for being brave enough to choose us, for fighting when it would have been easier to walk away, for becoming the mother Willa needed and the partner I'd stopped believing I could find. They kissed there on the couch they'd bought together at a secondhand store surrounded by the imperfect, beautiful life they'd created from courage and compromise. And the revolutionary act of believing love mattered more than logic. 2 years ago, Victoria had stood in a cafe contemplating her exit. Tonight, she sat in her home, held by the man she loved, knowing that her daughter slept safely down the hall. The distance between those two moments was measured not in time but in transformation. The journey from isolation to belonging, from success to significance, from existing to truly living. And it had started with one simple choice: to stay, to try, to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was worth more than her net worth. That maybe there were riches money couldn't buy and poverty money couldn't cure. She'd been right about all of it. The transformation hadn't been easy, probably never would be complete, but it was real and it was hers and it was enough. More than enough, everything.